Thank you, Elijah, and happy Mother's Day to everyone. It's such a bright and vibrant crowd that we've got here. You all must have dressed extra nice so as to impress your mothers. Glad to see it. Before I launch into it proper, we're going to have what has become a little tradition here at Southside. So if I could have the help of the teens, you didn't know that you were going to be called into action today, did you? We're going to distribute the pins now at this point to all of our mothers or grandmothers or motherly type figures. Now's your cue. This is the part where you all get up and help. Appreciate it. Come on, come get the pins. Yeah, this is the point. Okay, so mothers, if you would like a pin, raise your hand, please, and we will distribute these to you. Do you think we need to call in reinforcements? How about the kids who are over the age of going to children's worship? You want to help pass out pins? Any kids that want to help as well? All right. Grayson is going to throw them all over the room. It's going to be great. This is what he was born to do. So if you would like a pin, if you are a mother, a stepmother, a grandmother, if you have a motherly type relationship with any person in your life and you would like a pin, raise your hand and we'll be sure to get one to you. Mother's Day is really a special day for us at church, isn't it? Of course, we celebrate so many different types of mothers, and our grandmothers, those who have been motherly figures for us, and it's a very special Mother's Day for one family in particular today, because of course she didn't know that she would have a newborn today, and that is Nancy Gardner. Nancy and Russell welcomed their newborn Lucy Lee into the world. Just a couple of weeks ago on April 29th. This is her first Mother's Day, unbeknownst to her that she would already have a baby by now. So a huge congratulations to Russell and Nancy and proud grandparents Margaret and Steve Gardner and great-grandfather Ward as well. Congratulations to you all. As we continue to pass out the pins, would you like to hear the joke that I told to Russell and Nancy the morning on which Lucy was born? Okay, some of y'all look skeptical. I'm not sure you can handle this. Let's move on. The Bible story this morning. No, you want to hear the joke? Okay. I'm going to warn you, I've been workshopping this joke for weeks. I've told it to my wife on thousands of occasions already. I told it to Russell and Nancy. I was really trying to get this right. I had a whole drive to Texas for a wedding that I was doing a couple of weeks ago where I was practicing this joke, the whole 8-hour drive there. And when I told Russell and Nancy, well, you'll hear the joke first. So Russell and Nancy are both in the dental industry. Can you call it an industry, Grant? The profession. Okay, the medical sphere involving teeth. Nancy is an orthodontist and Russell is a dentist. Did I get that right? An orthodontist and a dentist. They met in dental school. And I told them, now, hey, listen, I don't have as much dental education as the two of you. But what I do have on you is I've been a parent now for 9 years. I'm going to go ahead and warn you, after having been through this a couple of times, don't be surprised. Don't be alarmed. Don't freak out. You don't need to call the doctor in when this happens. Don't need to bring out your stethoscope and your thermometers and all that good stuff. When the baby's born, let me just go ahead and warn you, she's not going to have any teeth. I appreciate that pity laugh there. When I told it to Russell, thank you. When I told it to Russell and Nancy, they did not laugh. They just looked at me, as my wife did 1,000 times. I told her that joke. In fact, I was really worried that the joke wouldn't go over well, and I was kind of disappointed that it didn't seem real successful with Russell and Nancy the morning on which Lucy was born. In fact, maybe it's because Nancy was already in labor and the preacher was the last person they wanted to see in the hospital. There's always that. But finally, the night had come. The baby was born in the middle of the night at 3:28 a.m. You want to know what Russell texted me? At 3:28 a.m., Russell texted me, Nancy and I are parents. We got the data on the baby, 4 pounds, 8 ounces, no length yet, 11:14 birth. The baby and mom are doing great, just watching baby now and not even on oxygen yet. Doc said she's just chilling in lots of hair. To which I responded, congratulations. And he said, wait a second, there's no teeth. So, congratulations to Russell and Nancy on the newborn, and also for making my joke a lot funnier than when I told it. Of course, Mother's Day is a very special occasion. Happy Mother's Day to all of you. And it's a very special day for us in our family. Not only is it Mother's Day, it's also mine and Rebecca's 12th anniversary. Can't quite hold a candle to your 61, Larry, but 12 is one more than we had last year. So there's that. In fact, I was talking to some friends yesterday, and a friend wished me happy anniversary. And I said, well, thank you so much. It's also Mother's Day, a very big day for us. And she said, well, what are you going to do to celebrate this anniversary and Mother's Day? And I said, nothing. And she said, what do you mean? Nothing. And I said, well, Rebecca and I were supposed to go to Eureka Springs for the day together a few days ago, but instead I drove to Oklahoma with my brother and went to the Thunder playoff basketball game, to which my friend made a noise kind of like that. And she said, Jared, I'm worried for you. You should probably get something for your wife for your anniversary and Mother's Day. So I got up at the crack of dawn, and I went and got Rebecca her favorite breakfast this morning. And of course, I'm sure she is eager and ready to forgive me, especially considering we all recited the words together this morning that if you don't forgive others, they're trespasses, okay? And so happy Mother's Day to everyone. Hope everyone is having a wonderful day. The goal today, whether you are a mother or you have a mother or not, is that we can encourage and empower all of our mothers this morning, and that we all, regardless of where we fall on that spectrum, might hear a word from the Lord. We'll do so from Genesis 16, first and foremost, this morning. The passage that Elijah read for us just a few moments ago from Genesis 16 tells the story of Hagar and Ishmael. Now, let's face it. When we think about the mothers of the Bible, Hagar isn't at the top of the list, is she? She's not one that we admire. She's not the one that we want to emulate. She's not Eve or Rachel or Leah or Rebecca or Hannah or Naomi or Ruth, certainly a far cry from Mary. Or as some biblical mothers are nobility, Hagar is an Egyptian slave. She's not the chosen one. She's a convenient instrument in Abram and Sarai's shortcut in Genesis 16. And then she's cast aside. There's so much surrounding this story that interferes with our ability to appreciate it for what God would have us to learn from this Bible story. In fact, centuries of tension in the Middle East. In fact, we even had a Bible class to make sense of it, of this tension in the Middle East just a few months ago, has stepped in front of us, in between us and the text, and interfered with our ability to understand it for what it is. In fact, the story of Ishmael and how Islam has taken that part of their story and incorporated it into their origin story, their narrative, I think for many of us puts this story at arm's length. We would much rather talk about Abraham than Hagar and Ishmael, wouldn't we? And yet, as I was preparing for Mother's Day this year, I became increasingly convicted that we need to hear Hagar's story this morning, because her story is a testament to God's faithfulness to the struggling, unseen mother. A story, of course, which we're going to take a look at here this morning. We learned that Ishmael is born between a rock and a hard place, and Hagar is instructed to bear Abram a son. Hagar, of course, the Egyptian slave, is used as an instrument here. She's a crutch in order to try to shortcut the promises of God. Sarai gives her slave to Abram and says, well, maybe this will be a way to fulfill God's promises. After all, clock is ticking, isn't it? Maybe this will be a convenient solution. And so she does her duty. She does what she's told, and it backfires heartbreakingly. So let's take a look at God's word. After this heartbreak, which we've just read about, this heartbreak, fulfilling her duty, doing what she's told, conceiving, she's then met with contempt from Sarai. Picking up now in verse 7. After Sarai has dealt harshly with her, she fled from her, and this is where we pick up in verse 7. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from? And where are you going? She said, I'm fleeing from my mistress Sarai. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her. The angel of the Lord also said to her, I will surely multiply your offspring, so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. The angel of the Lord said to her, "Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, and his hand against everyone, everyone's hand against him. He shall dwell over against all his kinsmen." So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing." For she said, "Truly here, I have seen him who looks after me." Therefore, the well was called Bir Lahai Roi. It lies between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Now, Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. This story, in so many ways, is remarkable, isn't it? Of course, the fact that we've got even one of our great patriarchs and his wife, who is in many ways an exemplary character, doing something that's a little bit under the table, isn't it? Something that perhaps we would frown upon in this day and age. We look, of course, at the exemplary facts of this story: Abram's advanced age, the angel appearing to the Lord and saving the day, and yet at the heart of all of this is Hagar's heartbreak, isn't it? We can relate to that kind of a heartbreak, though perhaps none of us are slaves who have been impregnated by our masters. It's a different kind of a heartbreak, the heartbreak of just doing what you were told and feeling like there was no way out of this other than through it. Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Hagar does what Sarai has told her. She then deals harshly with her. Hagar flees, and then here comes the angel. The angel tells her that his name is to be Ishmael. Of course, Ishmael, which means God hears. God hears. Pay attention to that. It's going to come back up again in a moment. The angel appeared to Hagar. His name was to be Ishmael. The Lord has listened to your affliction. And we see something a little bit different take place toward the end of this story, don't we? We find, of course, that instead of the angel giving Hagar a new name, we find Hagar does something that nobody else does in the Bible. She then, in turn, gives God a nickname. Interesting, isn't it? And she calls God the God of seeing, because he saw me in my affliction. Truly, I have seen him who looks after me. It's almost like how our moms seem to always know what's going on with us, even when we try to hide it, don't they? See, moms have a certain way of seeing, and I think that's a God-given ability, isn't it? Even though when I was a teenager, I wish that hadn't been the case. What about you? Of course, they always seem to know what's going on, and many times for us, we feel like we're alone in our struggles, in our afflictions, in our weakness. We cry out and say, "Does anybody know what I'm going through? I feel like I'm all alone in this." And yet Hagar's story is a testament to the fact that God sees, and he understands, and he cares for us. He sees us in our highs and our lows, in our struggles, and in our pain. For Hagar, God seeing was synonymous with his provision and his compassion. It's much like an expression that we have today to someone. You might look them in the eyes and say, "I see you." And that, of course, means I can, more than I literally can behold you with vision that comes from my eyes, one of my five senses. But that kind of a seeing goes beyond the surface level, doesn't it? But you see, the story with Hagar and Ishmael, it happens again. This isn't the only time in Genesis where Hagar hits rock bottom and cries out in distress. Just a few chapters later, tragedy strikes once more in Hagar's story. This isn't the only heartbreak in her biblical narrative. It isn't the only tragedy. It also isn't the only time that we see, if we're looking past Ishmael and Hagar and the trouble in the Middle East, and we can instead look to God. We see that Hagar's story shows us over and over and over the hand and heart of God intervening in her story. Perhaps it can be a lens for us to see his hand and his heart in our lives today. Turn over to Genesis 21, just a couple of chapters later. Well, finally, God has made good on his promise to Abraham to bestow upon him a son by way of Sarah, as he had promised, without the shortcut, miraculously so. And it's an amazing story, a good story, a redemptive story. Even Sarah, who tries to take a shortcut, then, of course, receives the promise of God. And in fact, it's such a baffling journey for Sarah that she laughs at this amazing thing that has taken place in bearing to Abraham Isaac at this point in the story. There must be something about Sarah's who laughs. Sarah, our office administrator, is known for her iconic laugh. Everyone, if you know Sarah, you know her laugh. Surely she was laughing at my joke a few minutes ago, right? Surely you could hear it even in the back row. Well, here's the thing. That laugh might be a beautiful thing. It might be a good thing. But in this story, Sarah's laugh was something that really did a number on Hagar. In fact, her hearing Sarah's laughter, of course, triggers something within Hagar and causes her to run away. She feels like she's the laughing stock now. She hears in verse 9 of Genesis 21, Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman. Genesis 21, verse 9 and following. Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. And God said to Abraham, be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son and of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. Now, it might seem that that's a happily ever after of the story, isn't it? Okay, God took care of Hagar and Ishmael, even though it's a really messy situation. In fact, it would be really nice to be done with this part of the story and get on to Isaac being the next great patriarch in the Genesis lineage, and yet not so. In fact, a little warning here, this next part of the story is quite depressing. And yet, once again, it's a window through which we can see the faithfulness of God. In verse 15, when the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him, a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot. For she said, let me not look on the death of the child. And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Let's face it, the story of Hagar and Ishmael is a rocky one, a tumultuous one to examine on Mother's Day, I admit. And yet, isn't it remarkable the way that God continues to keep good on his promise? Even when the other characters in the story, the ones we love and appreciate and are listed in the great Hall of Fame of Faith and in Hebrews 11, in the lineage of Jesus himself, even these great patriarchs, well, they make a misstep or two along the way. It's a messy story. There's no way around it. You see, Hagar was worried for her son, so worried she thought he was going to die. Perhaps some of you this morning have been there as well, points in time where you were so concerned for your children that you broke down and wept. Perhaps a point in time when things were so ugly for your children that you couldn't even look upon them. Perhaps there had to be some distance between the two of you because you didn't want to see the way that it played out. And yet we see here in this story, even in her distress, in her affliction, God heard. That's Ishmael's namesake in the first place, isn't it? The God who sees in chapter 16, and here we find the God who hears. One of our favorite hobbies in our house, one of our favorite shows is the TV show Survivor. Talk to us long enough, you'll hear us talk about it. And we've got some of our friends, of course, who we all talk about each episode after it airs. And there's been over 45 seasons of this show. Some of you thought it ended in 2004, didn't you? Back after it was popular. And there's this trope that always happens, and you can see it coming from a mile away on Survivor. In fact, it's probably happened to some of you this past week in the workplace. It happens to us if we're not on our guard. See, what happens is 2 or 3 characters will start plotting the demise of another behind their back when they don't think they're listening. They come up with all the reasons why they should vote them out at the next tribal council. Everything they do that bothers them. The way that they chew their food wrong. And the way they don't get enough fire for the firewood pile. The way that this person, maybe they eat too much food. They eat food the wrong way. Or they don't cook the coconut the way everybody likes to cook the coconut. They will come up with any excuse under the sun so as to get them out of here. And inevitably, every season, all 46 of them, sooner or later, when 2 or 3 characters are plotting the demise of another behind their back, we as the viewer, through the lens of the camera, can see right behind them is standing the very person that they're talking about. And that usually plays out one of 2 or 3 ways. One is they go and muster their troops to vote the very person out that was trying to get them out of the game. You can tell I'm a super fan, can't you? Or perhaps, and this is the saddest part, these are real people with real emotions. Maybe they walk down the beach, they hang their head and weep. You see, that kind of hearing isn't necessarily the kind of hearing that we're talking about here, is it? That's the kind of hearing that causes our stomach to just drop 10 stories in the elevator. Perhaps you've been there. And yet this kind of hearing, the hearing that God does, hearing Hagar in her affliction in chapter 16, hearing Ishmael crying out in seemingly his last moments of life here in chapter 21, this kind of hearing is the kind of hearing that, much like for Hagar, should lift our spirits. Because brothers and sisters, when we cry out to God in our pain and our affliction and our distress and our low moments and our weak points, brothers and sisters, the good news, as we can see it over and over and over in the biblical narrative, is this, that our God is a God who hears us. Isn't it remarkable that when we lift our voices to God, He's given us the avenue of prayer, that He might hear us and care about what it is? Doesn't God already know? Isn't this the catch-22 of prayer? Doesn't He already know what we want before we ask Him? Doesn't He already know what we need, even if we don't know what we need? And yet, this is what God has asked of us, is to pray without ceasing. Well, why is that? Perhaps it's simply because of this fact revealed to us in Genesis 16 and 22, because our God is a God who hears us. And He wants to hear from us. All because of this, because He is a God who provides. You see, God kept His promise for Hagar and Ishmael. He kept it over and over and over again. And even when other characters seem to pivot the trajectory of the story, even when there's a big boulder in the middle of the creek that seems to divert the stream another direction, God says, no, don't get ahead of yourselves. You see, I made you a promise, and there's nothing you can do that will make me change that promise. There's nothing they can do that will make me go back on my word. Not Abraham, not Sarah, not the newborn chosen one, Isaac. No, you see, I am the God who provides, and God keeps His promises. You see, I think the mistake that we often make is we focus too much on these great Bible heroes. And so we idolize someone like Abraham, and perhaps we villainize someone like Hagar. What if instead of getting so fixated on Hagar or Ishmael or Abraham or Isaac or Sarah, what if instead we let them be a springboard to help us to see God a little bit better? Whether you're a mother or a grandmother or a stepmother, or perhaps if you've never been able to have children and have always wanted them, or perhaps you've lost a mother. Whatever your motherly relationship looks like this morning, can't we all see a little bit closer the God who sees, the God who hears, and the God who provides? You see, mothers, the good news is this: God sees you in your sleepless nights. He hears you when you cry out. He knows your struggle, and He has promised to provide. Motherhood is often doing the dishes and the laundry. It's soccer practices and dance recitals and ER visits and x-rays. Maybe that's for mothers of boys. We've not had to make any ER visits or x-rays, knock on wood. No, the podium's, wrought iron. I don't suppose that works, does it? You get the point, don't you? You see, when your kid is in trouble in school and in a financial bind, in a bad relationship, and you cry out to God, feeling like there's no right answer, no clear path forward, when you, like Hagar, are stuck between a rock and a hard place, we look to Scripture to see that our God is a God who sees. Our God is a God who hears. And our God is a God who provides. And it's easy to see how we get to the gospel from here, isn't it? You see, this is just a little glimpse of the gospel story that will eventually unfold through the seed of Abraham, Jesus Christ. The God who keeps his promises will continue to do so over and over again. And even when we fall short, that God is faithful. He sees us in our iniquities. He hears us in our cries of pain and our hurt, and he sees our struggles with sin, and yet he does not leave us there. Much like Hagar crying out in the wilderness, thinking they're both going to die. God doesn't just see us and hear us and say, sorry, I wish I could do something. You see, this is the gospel. Brothers and sisters, he has done something. And it came at great expense to himself. You see, he revealed himself to us through the Word made flesh. And that Word that was made flesh then went to the cross, and that flesh was beaten and bloodied and broken on our behalf so that we might have a restored relationship with him. So what's the point? Well, it's okay to care about your children. It's okay to care to the point where you're heartbroken and distressed, and perhaps even you break down and weep. Let's face it, sometimes we can't even look upon the distress of our children. Sometimes they disappoint us, and other times we hurt for them when they experience hardship. Brothers and sisters, may we, like Hagar, take our concerns to the Lord, lift them up in trust and in faith. And if you lift your children up into God's hands, let me tell you this, there's no better place they can be. And remember, one day, God has promised to wipe every tear from our eyes. So the question this morning is, will you bring him your tears, your distress, your worries, your concerns? Do you need to respond to the Lord's invitation? Do you need to learn more about this God who sees and hears and provides? We'd love to go deeper with you in his word so that you can discover more about the character and the heart of God this morning. We'd love to help you with whatever your concern is, if you'll come now as we stand and sing.